It's strange how quiet a house can be when something is ending inside it. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom at least for another few hours, watching Jessica fold clothes with a kind of mechanical detachment. The suitcase was already half full. Blouses, sweaters, a scarf I bought her from a street vendor in Charleston 3 years ago, all being packed away with the same carelessness you'd use boxing up old holiday decorations. The lake outside the window sat still, the sun beginning to dip below the tree line. I should have said something sooner, maybe weeks ago. But I didn't. Because until that morning I'd been clinging to the lie that everything was fine. She hadn't noticed me at first, too focused on folding a pale blue blouse I distinctly remembered buying for our anniversary 2 years ago. It still had the little embroidered edge she said reminded her of waves. She was folding it like it was just another thing to take, not a memory she was choosing to abandon. In my hand, crumpled and sweat-stained, was the hotel receipt I'd found while checking her jacket for laundry. Knoxville. 2 nights. 1 room. 2 guests. I'd stared at it for a long time, honestly hoping it was a mistake. A clerical error. A receipt she picked up accidentally or one that belonged to a friend. Anything but what it obviously was. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became. The name on the reservation was hers and there was no mistaking what it implied. So I asked her. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, "What's this?" and held the paper out to her like some clueless husband in a TV drama who still believed in coincidences. She looked at it for half a second and didn't even blink. Just paused mid-fold and said, "I was going to tell you." That was it. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "It's not what it looks like." No shock, no shame, just calm detachment. Like this had already been rehearsed. "You were going to tell me?" I repeated, not entirely sure I believed my own voice. "When?" She sighed, actually sighed, like I was the one making this inconvenient. "Zach," she said, turning to face me, "you have to admit our life's become predictable." I couldn't believe it. Predictable. She nodded and I watched her brace herself like she thought this was some brave declaration of truth. "You're too good. You always try so hard to do everything right." And somewhere along the line, I started to feel like I wasn't living. I felt suffocated. That word, suffocated, landed like a gut punch. I wanted to laugh just so I wouldn't break down. So that was the angle. Not guilt, not remorse, but justification. She was turning it all back on me. As if fidelity, dependability, and love were somehow crimes against spontaneity. I didn't say much after that. I think my silence made her uncomfortable. She kept moving, zipping up compartments in her suitcase, grabbing the charger from the wall, avoiding my eyes like I was a stranger in a hotel lobby instead of the man she'd promised forever to. Then I turned and walked to the study. Sat down at the desk we used for bills and calendars and PTA notes. I pulled up our joint account and, without fanfare, moved most of the money into a separate savings account, one marked only for the kids. Tuition, medical stuff, groceries if they stayed with her for a weekend. But that was it. She'd get nothing else from me. The house? That was mine. We bought it with money my dad left me after he passed, and I made sure the deed reflected that. At the time, she didn't care, said it was just paperwork. Now, I figured she might see it differently. She must have realized something had changed because she stopped packing and walked into the study as I was closing out the banking tab. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Adjusting for the new reality," I said, not even looking up. "You want to change? This is it." For the first time since I confronted her, she looked thrown off. Like she'd expected a different script, maybe yelling, begging, or some dramatic gesture where I fought to keep her. But all I gave her was quiet, deliberate action. "This doesn't have to be ugly," she said carefully. I looked at her then, really looked at her. Her arms were folded, her jaw set like she was trying to remain composed. But behind it I saw something I hadn't expected: doubt. She hadn't imagined this version of me. She'd prepared for the man who always compromised, always gave second chances, always tried too hard to fix things. "You sure about that?" I asked. "Because to me, this already is." She opened her mouth, closed it again. Then looked around the room like she was trying to remember what she'd come in for. I walked past her, back toward the bedroom. Stood in the same doorway I had before, watching that half-full suitcase again. I knew every item in there. I'd bought most of them. Knew the stories behind them. But she was treating it all like a shipment to another life. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she said behind me, her voice quieter now. "It just did." I nodded slowly. That's what people say when they're not willing to take responsibility. She didn't argue. Instead, she finished packing in silence. The zipping of the suitcase sounded like the final chord of a song I never wanted to hear again. When she rolled it past me toward the front door, she paused. For a moment, I thought she might say something that mattered. Maybe admit it, maybe even apologize. But she didn't. Instead, she said, "I didn't think you'd take it like this." I gave a soft, humorless laugh. "You mean calmly?" She nodded. "I stopped being surprised a while ago," I said. "I just didn't want to believe it." And with that, she walked out. No hug, no backward glance, no tears. Just the sound of her heels on the hardwood floor, fading down the hallway and out the door. I stood there in the stillness of the house, surrounded by everything she left behind, her perfume lingering in the air, the empty space in the closet, and a silence so heavy it felt like grief. But under the sadness, something else was starting to take root. Clarity. After the door shut behind her, I just stood there, staring at the space where she used to be. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. The suitcase wheels had rolled out of the house like the final notes of a bad song, and I was left in the silence she created. You'd think that moment, the actual leaving, would feel like the breaking point, but it wasn't. The breaking point came later, when I finally sat down in the living room, alone, and started replaying everything I had missed. The truth didn't come all at once. It never does. It starts like a crack in the ceiling you don't notice until it spreads across the entire wall. That night, as I sat on the couch in the same spot where Jessica used to curl up next to me to watch old black and white movies, I began tracing back all the little things that hadn't made sense. Things I had brushed off, dismissed, excused. There were the business trips she suddenly started taking more often, even though her job didn't usually require travel. Knoxville wasn't the first time she was gone for work. There had been Atlanta, Nashville, and one weekend she said she was at a wellness retreat with her cousin. I remember thinking it was odd she didn't post a single photo. Not even of the spa food she always loved bragging about. Then there were the yoga sessions. Weekly at first. Then 3 times a week. Then suddenly she started going to a different studio on the other side of town because it had better instructors. At the time, I supported her. Told her it was good she was prioritizing herself. But now I remembered how she'd always be running late, how she'd walk in with damp hair and that look like she'd been somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. Even her phone habits had changed. Subtle things. Nothing obvious enough to raise alarms on its own. She started keeping it face down on the table. Said it was a bad habit to check it so often. But that habit came right after she got a new lock screen password. And then there were the late-night texts, always followed by a quiet smile or a quick swipe of the screen when I walked by. And the perfume. God, how did I miss that? She'd worn the same one since our 2nd anniversary. Said it reminded her of our trip to Savannah, the one where we got caught in a rainstorm and laughed our way through it barefoot. But then one morning she smelled different. Subtle, but it was there. A new scent. She said she wanted to try something a little bolder. I told her it suited her. I meant it as a compliment, but now I wondered if she had been testing how much she could change before I noticed. I sat on the couch for hours, each memory another puzzle piece clicking into place. Her growing defensiveness. Her sudden obsession with personal space. The way she'd changed the subject anytime I asked about her day. How she stopped reaching for my hand in public. At the time, I thought it was stress. Life. Maybe we were just in a rut like every couple hits eventually. But now I could see it clearly, we weren't in a rut. She was already halfway out the door. What hit hardest wasn't just the betrayal. It was how meticulously she had planned it, how far back it must have started. This wasn't about one bad decision. This was about a calculated exit. A slow-motion erasure of our life together. It's a special kind of pain, realizing someone you trusted spent months designing their escape while you were still planning your future together. I remember this one Sunday morning, we were making pancakes, joking about which city we'd retire in someday. She laughed and said, "Somewhere quiet. Where the kids can visit with their kids." I laughed too. And all the while, she already had her foot halfway out the door, didn't she? She was probably already seeing him then. Or texting him. Or imagining a different life, one that didn't include the man flipping pancakes in his favorite worn t-shirt. I sat there and tried to remember the last time she kissed me like she meant it. The last time her eyes lit up when I walked into the room. I couldn't pinpoint it. That absence had crept in so slowly I hadn't even noticed it was gone. I'd been so focused on making life work, on being a good partner, a good provider, a good dad, that I didn't realize I'd been written out of her story. And the part that gutted me the most? She made it sound like it was my fault. "You're too good." That's what she'd said. Like being decent was a flaw. Like being steady, reliable, committed made me somehow unworthy of love. I started laughing. Not the funny kind, more like the kind that bubbles up from a place of pure disbelief. The kind of laugh that catches in your throat and feels more like a breakdown. How many nights had I stayed late at work so I could give us a better life? How many of my own hobbies and friendships had I put on pause to make sure she had space to grow, to chase her goals? I never cheated. I never lied. I never once made her feel small or unimportant. And still, I lost. But it wasn't about winning or losing. Not anymore. It was about understanding what kind of person I had shared a bed with for over a decade. I picked up my phone. I didn't text her. I didn't scroll through our old photos. I just opened the Notepad app and started writing down everything I remembered, dates, details, odd behavior, anything that might matter later. My lawyer would probably need a timeline. But really, I think I did it because I needed to get it out of my head. Writing it all down felt like building a wall, something to protect me from drowning in the confusion. Sometime after midnight, I moved to our bedroom, well, my bedroom now. The closet door was still open, one side empty, hangers swinging slightly. The space looked lopsided, like the room itself was confused about who it belonged to. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, and somewhere between memory and exhaustion, a quiet resolve settled in. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was war. Not the screaming kind. Not the revenge-fueled soap opera kind. No, I would fight with dignity. With silence. With facts. With boundaries. She had made her choices. Now I was making mine. I didn't sleep much that night. I barely even closed my eyes. Lying there in our bed, or my bed now, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. It didn't. It never does. But at some point, the stillness of the room became too loud and I got up. Pacing wasn't helping anymore. I needed clarity. Proof. Something undeniable that would crush the last sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, I had misread everything. It was almost 3 in the morning when I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that tasted like regret. My hands moved on their own, muscle memory guiding me to her laptop, which she hadn't taken. Maybe she forgot it in the rush. Or maybe she didn't think I'd go looking. Either way, it was right there, sitting like a loose thread waiting to be pulled. I opened the lid and was greeted by her desktop, still logged in. No password required. That in itself almost made me laugh. She had protected her phone like it contained national secrets, but the device that synced half her life was wide open. I took that as a sign. If the universe wanted me to know the truth, this was it practically begging me to look. The laptop fan kicked on quietly as I started digging. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for at first, maybe emails, a hidden folder, anything out of place. For the first 20 minutes, I found nothing. Just the usual, work documents, shopping tabs, playlists. She had always been neat. Organized. I had almost convinced myself I was chasing shadows. And then I found it. Buried deep in a folder titled Phone Backups _22 was a subfolder named Sync_Auto. It looked like some kind of automatic phone backup. Maybe from an old sync she'd forgotten about. My heart started pounding. I clicked into it, barely breathing. Messages. Hundreds of them. Exported from her phone and tucked away in plain sight. Most were boring chats with her sister, coworkers, the grocery store rewards app. But then I saw the name. Brian. The moment I read it, I felt the air shift. Brian was familiar. A name I hadn't heard in years. He used to work with me. Not well, either. He was the kind of guy who hovered too close and smiled a little too wide when talking to your wife at company barbecues. I remembered introducing him to Jessica once at a conference. They exchanged a polite hello, talked about hiking trails in Tennessee, and that was that. Or so I thought. I opened the first message. It was dated over 6 months ago. Brian, still thinking about that drink. Hard to concentrate when you're stuck in my head like that. Jessica, haha. Dangerous thing to say to a married woman. Smirking face. That emoji might as well have been a bullet. I clicked to the next one. Brian, it was just a conference. No rules, remember? Winking face. Jessica, God, you're terrible. I have a husband. I shouldn't even be texting you. Brian, doesn't seem to be stopping you. Jessica, you're not making this easy. I kept scrolling. The messages grew bolder. More explicit. Not just in tone, but in what they were planning. Jessica, we need to be careful. Zach's been suspicious lately. He asked about Knoxville. Brian, let him ask. He's not the type to make a scene. You said it yourself, he's too good. Jessica, yeah, and that's the part that makes this so hard. He doesn't deserve this. Brian, but here you are. There it was. Confirmation, black and white, timestamped and archived. They had used Knoxville as a meetup point because it was neutral ground. The messages detailed how they coordinated travel schedules, excuses for being away, alibis built around business trips and cousin visits. They even talked about what she should say if I found out. One thread chilled me more than the others. Brian, what's the plan? Long term. Jessica, I don't know yet. I need to make sure I don't lose everything if this goes south. Brian, housing? Money? Jessica, he'd never cut me off completely. He's not that kind of guy. Brian, then what are you waiting for? That line, that assumption, that expectation that I'd just roll over and make it easy for them. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of it all pressed down on me. It wasn't just cheating. It wasn't even just betrayal. It was premeditated. They had mapped it out like a business deal, maximizing her comfort while minimizing risk. I was the variable to be controlled, the obstacle to be navigated. I couldn't even feel angry in that moment. Just cold. Empty. Like something sacred had been burned down and all that was left was ash. I copied the folder. Every screenshot asterisk T. Every text. Every time-stamped whisper of what they had done behind my back. Then I emailed it to myself, added it to a USB drive, and backed it up again. Not because I needed more evidence, I already had too much, but because I wanted to preserve my clarity. I never wanted to gaslight myself into doubting what I knew. Then I drafted a message. Simple. No drama. Just truth. To Jessica. I found the messages with Brian. From now on, we communicate only about the kids. I'm done. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned off the laptop, got up, and walked outside. The lake was still as glass. The moonlight reflected off the surface like a mirror, and for a moment, I imagined the life we were supposed to have, the one she shattered. I imagined the family dinners, the laughter, the slow growing old together. But that version of reality was gone. The truth had become its own kind of silence. And silence, I was learning, could be louder than any scream. When I came back inside, I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the table again. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't pacing. I just sat still, watching the light on the coffee maker blink. Minutes passed. Then an hour. And finally, my phone lit up. Jessica, Zach, please. We need to talk. I didn't respond. Because we didn't. After I sent the message, just one sentence to end everything, I muted Jessica's number. No calls. No follow-ups. No explanations. I'd seen enough. That night, I slept for 4 hours. Not much, but better than the night before. There's something about seeing the full scope of betrayal that, oddly, brings a certain peace. You stop wondering. You stop spinning stories to protect your own heart. In the days that followed, I didn't hear from her except for one message: can we please talk? Not about the kids. Just us. I didn't answer. There was no us anymore. There was me, the kids, and a pile of memories I now had to separate into real and rehearsed. She moved out officially a week later. Found a one-bedroom apartment in Chattanooga, closer to her job. Or maybe closer to Brian, though from what I gathered through mutual acquaintances, that connection was already fading. People like Brian don't plan for the long haul. They chase novelty, and once the thrill dies, so do they. What Jessica had traded our life for wasn't a future, it was a fantasy. And like most fantasies, it fell apart under the weight of everyday life. By the third week, the messages started coming. Casual at first. Short questions about the kids. Then came the longer ones. Hey. Do you think you could help with Taylor's new school shoes? I'm a little tight right now. Zach, I'm trying. But the new place has a lot of unexpected costs. Just until I catch up. I know I don't have a right to ask. But please. For the kids. Every time she said for the kids, I felt that old pang, the one that made me want to fix things, to absorb the impact so no one else had to feel it. But I had to remind myself, this was her storm. She chose to walk into it with eyes wide open. I responded only when it concerned the children directly. Yes, I'd pay for school supplies. Yes, I'd handle the doctor's appointments. No, I would not transfer funds to her account. No, I would not help her get through this emotionally. That part was her job now. The coldness wasn't spite. It was clarity. I started drawing firm lines. Lines I should have drawn years ago. The ones I thought love meant you never needed. In our small town, news travels like smoke in dry grass. I didn't say anything to anyone, but people knew. They always know. I could tell by the way some folks lowered their voices when I entered the grocery store. The way others gave me that nod of respect that comes when a quiet man gets blindsided and doesn't lose his mind in the process. I didn't ask for pity. I didn't want revenge. But I'll admit, there was a part of me that took a strange, quiet satisfaction in how things played out. Jessica had left looking for a rush, for passion, for something thrilling. What she found was a second-floor walk-up with leaky pipes and bills she hadn't budgeted for. Brian, apparently, had ghosted her within a month. That was what stung her the most. I could see it in the way she wrote. It wasn't just the money. It was the humiliation. She hadn't just lost her marriage. She'd bet everything on someone who never planned to stay. She still showed up for the kids, at least at first. Tried to be upbeat, tried to mask the unraveling with big smiles and weekend trips to the local zoo or discount movie nights. But I could tell. So could the kids, in their own way. Taylor stopped asking when Mommy's coming to dinner. Ben started calling me for things he used to wait to ask her. I didn't encourage it, but I didn't stop it either. One afternoon, she showed up late to pick them up. Hair a mess, circles under her eyes. She gave me a tight smile, tried to make a joke. Something about single mom life. I didn't laugh. I just handed her the bag with their things and reminded her about the dentist appointment next week. I could use a little grace, you know, she said, half under her breath. I met her eyes. So could I replied. But here we are. She didn't respond, just nodded, loaded the kids into the car, and drove off. I went back inside and sat in the quiet. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a phase or a separation with hope at the end of it. This was the new normal. The woman I used to know was gone. In her place was someone who had made a series of selfish decisions, dressed them up as personal growth, and walked out expecting applause. She wasn't a villain, and I wasn't a saint. But what mattered now was the boundary between us, and keeping it intact. That weekend, I had the kids and decided to take them to the state park for a picnic. Just the three of us. It wasn't fancy. PB&Js, juice boxes, and a frisbee. But the laughter was real. It was the first time I'd felt genuinely happy since everything went down. On the drive back, Taylor asked, "Why doesn't Mommy live here anymore?" I kept my eyes on the road, took a deep breath. Because sometimes adults make decisions that change things. But that doesn't mean they don't love you. Did she make a bad decision? She asked, voice small. I paused. Yes, I said. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it. She nodded, quiet, then changed the subject, asking if we could have pancakes for dinner. I said yes. Later that night, I got a message from Jessica. I saw the pictures Taylor posted. Looked like a really nice day. I miss that. I miss us. I stared at it for a long time, and then I did something I hadn't done in a while. I deleted the message. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I didn't want her words taking up space in my life anymore. She had chosen this path. She had mapped out her exit, her affair, her plan to keep the comforts of home while trading in the commitment. Now she was seeing the cost. And I was finally learning to live without looking over my shoulder. The cold had settled in. But it wasn't bitter. It was clear. It was sharp. And for the first time in a long time, it was mine. 2 months passed. The silence between us, once tense and fragile, had calcified into something solid. Routine became my armor. I woke up, packed the kids' lunches, dropped them at school, went to work, came home, made dinner, checked homework. The motions were the same, but the meaning had shifted. Everything now had a different weight. The kind that comes after truth scorches away denial. Jessica's name barely came up anymore. Taylor stopped asking for bedtime calls. Ben, younger and more resilient, just went with the flow. I could see the quiet confusion in their eyes sometimes. But kids have a way of adjusting to the world faster than adults. Especially when the adults around them stop pretending. Jessica still saw them on weekends, but the visits grew shorter. More hurried. The first few times she'd try to fake energy, show up with a new board game, or promise a mini road trip that never quite happened. But she wasn't built for consistency. The cracks were showing. I got a call from Taylor's school counselor one afternoon. Apparently, Jessica had missed a scheduled pickup and didn't answer her phone for an hour. The counselor said Taylor wasn't distressed, just confused. I thanked her for letting me know. That night, I didn't say a word to Jessica. Just noted it down in a document I had started keeping. Dates, times, incidents. No emotion. Just facts. I wasn't preparing for battle. I was preparing for inevitability. Then, out of nowhere, Jessica asked to meet. Not to talk logistics or swap weekend plans. Not through text either. A call. The first one I had answered from her in weeks. I need to see you, she said. Not alone. With the kids. Just. I think it's important. There was a tremble in her voice, like she was trying to mask desperation with composure. I agreed, mostly for the kids. We settled on the park near the lake, the same one where we used to walk in autumn, hot coffee in hand, watching the leaves fall like confetti. I arrived first. Brought the kids. Taylor carried a book, Ben, a soccer ball. They ran ahead while I stayed near the bench under the oak tree. When Jessica arrived, I barely recognized her. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, but not the effortless kind, more like she hadn't tried. She wore an old hoodie I hadn't seen since before we had kids. No makeup. Her face looked tired. Not tired like a long day at work. Tired like months of decisions collapsing into consequences. "Hey," she said, offering a thin smile. I nodded. "Hey." She sat beside me. Left space between us. That space was louder than anything she could have said. "The kids look good," she said. "They're doing all right." There was a long pause. The wind rustled the leaves. Nearby, Ben kicked the ball too hard and started chasing it. Taylor laughed. Jessica looked down at her hands. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything." She swallowed. The choices I made. What I thought I wanted. What I thought I deserved. I said nothing. Just let her talk. "I thought Brian and I," she started, then stopped. "I thought it was real. You know? Like the kind of thing you read about. Two people who find each other in the middle of lives that feel too quiet." I turned to her finally. "And was it?" She shook her head. "No. Not even close." "Then why are we here, Jessica?" She hesitated. "Because I think I made a mistake." I nodded slowly. "You think?" She looked at me then. Really looked. Her eyes were glassy, but not the kind that demanded pity. She knew she wasn't owed that anymore. "I know I did," she admitted. "I left something steady. Honest. Because I got scared. Because I felt like I was fading into the background of my own life. And instead of talking to you, I looked for someone who made me feel like I was still wanted." I absorbed her words in silence. "I wasn't chasing him," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I was running from myself." I studied her. The weight loss. The worn expression. The ringless hand fiddling with her sleeve. All of it said more than her apology ever could. "You told me I was too good," I said. "You made it sound like that was the problem." She nodded. "Because I didn't know how to be good back." The kids ran back over, flushed from playing. Taylor plopped beside me on the bench. Ben grabbed a juice box from the bag and sat cross-legged on the grass. Neither of them looked at her. Jessica turned toward me again, lowering her voice. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't have that right. But if there's anything left." "There isn't," I said quietly. Her mouth opened slightly as if the finality hadn't quite sunk in. "I didn't just lose you," she whispered. "I lost everything." I looked at the kids. "Not everything," I said. "But the version of me you knew? He's not yours anymore." She wiped at her face quickly like she didn't want the kids to see. Taylor was busy reading. Ben was humming to himself. The moment passed unnoticed by them. Jessica stood up. "Can I take them next weekend?" I nodded. "Text me the plan by Thursday." "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady again, but her hands betrayed her. As she turned to leave, she paused. "For what it's worth. I miss what we had." I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. But because anything I said would have given her a piece of closure she hadn't earned yet. She walked away, slower than usual. I watched until she was out of sight. Then I turned to Taylor. "You hungry?" I asked. "Always," she said, grinning. We walked to the diner a few blocks down. Ate pancakes for dinner. Talked about school projects and how Ben wanted to be a magician this week. It was normal. Easy. No lingering sadness. Later that night, after they went to bed, I sat in the living room and stared at the spot where her wedding photo used to hang. I had taken it down weeks ago. The wall looked better without it. A part of me had expected this meeting. The script was familiar. Regret, realization, the slow drip of apologies. What I hadn't expected was how little it shook me. That was the surprise. The real turning point. I wasn't waiting for her to come back. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. The illusion was gone. The story she told herself about escape, about freedom, about deserving more, had collapsed under its own weight. And in its place, she found something she never planned for. Loneliness. The kind that lingers even in crowded rooms. The kind that isn't solved with wine and weekend flings. The kind that follows you when you've burned the one bridge that was actually built to last. She had said I was too good. And maybe she was right. But I wasn't hers anymore. I never wanted it to get messy. But when it came to protecting the kids, I didn't hesitate. 2 weeks after that meeting in the park, I filed for full custody. Not out of spite, out of necessity. Jessica's inconsistency was growing obvious, and I needed something formal in place to protect their stability. The missed pickups, the last-minute cancellations, her inability to separate her personal fallout from her role as a mother. My lawyer didn't flinch. "You've got a strong case," she said. "Just keep documenting." Jessica was blindsided. She tried to paint herself as the victim of excessive control, claiming I was trying to cut her out. But facts are stubborn things, and I had them: texts, school reports, a growing trail of unreliability. Her emotional state wasn't malicious. It was just unstable. To her credit, she didn't fight dirty. Instead, she pivoted. Found work at a local women's shelter, helping divorcees get back on their feet. The irony wasn't lost on me, but maybe she was trying, in her own way, to make something useful out of the wreckage. The judge granted me primary custody with strict conditions. She'd see the kids twice a week, supervised at first. No overnight visits until further review. I didn't gloat. I just nodded, accepted the ruling, and went home to make dinner. That night, when I told the kids the new schedule, Taylor just said, "Okay," and went back to drawing. Ben asked if he could still show Mommy his Lego set on Sundays. I said yes. Jessica didn't text that night. She didn't have to. She knew. 2 years passed. Life didn't go back to what it was. It became something else. Something quieter, calmer, better in ways I hadn't expected. I met someone. Her name's Emily. We met at a friend's dinner party, both a little reluctant to open up. But we talked, and kept talking. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen for who I was, not what I could provide or how stable I was. But for me, it wasn't built on trauma. It wasn't a rebound. It was slow, intentional. And that made all the difference. Jessica stayed at the shelter. From what I heard, she was good at the work. Empathetic, honest, even protective of the women she mentored. I think facing her own fall made her more grounded. She stopped asking for second chances. She stopped asking for anything, really, just focused on her job and her visits with the kids. Then came an unexpected email. A family values conference was coming to town. Local speakers, real stories. Jessica was helping organize it and asked if I'd consider sharing ours. Together, separately but on the same stage. Her only condition: we each speak our truth. No manipulation. I agreed. Not for her, but for anyone who might need to hear it. That night, standing in front of a small auditorium, I told the story. Not the sensationalized version, but the human one. About love, betrayal, boundaries, and healing. Jessica went after. She didn't beg for sympathy. She owned it. When it ended, people clapped. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. As I walked off the stage, we crossed paths briefly. She looked at me and said, "Thank you." I nodded. "Take care, Jess. We were done long ago. But now, finally, we were at peace." Her final words echoed in my mind. "You were too good, maybe, but I was finally good, for someone who knew what that was worth."